Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Today's video is a compilation of 8 mysteries in which people lost their lives in mysterious circumstances. Some of these mysteries are said by investigators to be solved, while others remain unsolved. With that being said, let's get into it.
The only unsolved homicide in Oswego County.
Heidi Allen's disappearance Easter morning.
Though 20 years have passed since Heidi Allen's disappearance on April 3rd, 1994, this anniversary hasn't gotten any easier on a mother who lost her 18-year-old daughter just before her graduation.
20 years later, I still don't have Heidi, and I want that closure.
Heidi Marie Allen was an 18-year-old young woman who had dreams of one day having a family and working in either education or counseling. She was remarkably close to graduating from Onondaga Community College with a degree in Human Services, and she had just recently put in a job application with the District Attorney's Office of Oswego County. Heidi's name will be forever tied to the District Attorney's Office of Oswego County, but not because of a job. On Easter Day, April 3, 1994, Heidi Marie Allen would seemingly vanish with very few clues left behind. Allen worked at D&W Convenience Store at the corner of State Highway 104 and 104B in New Haven, New York. She was working alone and had opened the store by herself at approximately 5:45 that Easter morning. Sometime between 8 and 8:15 a.m., a person flagged down an Oswego County Sheriff deputy in front of the gas station. When police entered the convenience store, they found all the cash still in the register. They also found several small stacks of cash on the counter from where customers had left money for the fuel and merchandise that they had taken since no one was working the front counter. The last transaction that had been recorded on the cash register was at 7:42 earlier in that morning. The police conducted a thorough search of the store and surrounding parking area, but they found almost no clues. Heidi's jacket, purse, and keys were still in the store, and her maroon station wagon was still sitting in the parking lot. It was obvious that Heidi had not chosen to just leave. Shortly after police had begun their inquiries into Allen's disappearance, Richard Thibodeau heard that something had happened to Heidi from the D&W convenience store. He knew that he needed to contact the police because he had been at the store earlier that morning and had seen Heidi. He phoned the investigators and notified them that he had been in the store earlier that morning to purchase 2 packs of cigarettes. According to Richard, he had no clue that his cooperation with police would change his life forever. A witness called 911 and said that he saw a light blue van in the parking lot of the convenience store that morning. He claimed that he saw 2 men with a woman around the van. He then claimed that one of the men had the female in a bear hug grip and put her into the van. The type of grip that he described as being a bear hug grip is very important. We'll bring this up later. This is where the investigators made their first connection to Richard Thibodeau. Richard drove a van very similar to the one the witness said that he saw that morning. There is one major issue with this connection, though. Thibodeau's van was clearly white and black, not blue. Regardless, many people have said that the police looked no further once they found a connection to Richard that day. Some have gone as far as to accuse the investigators of creating a case solely to try and prove Thibodeau guilty and not a case of trying to find Heidi and what really happened to her. A month after the mystery of what happened to Heidi Allen began, the police had zoned in and arrested Richard. Not long after arresting Richard, they arrested his brother Gary Thibodeau as well. Both men would go on to be charged and go to trial. Richard Thibodeau would be found not guilty on all charges. It is important that we remember the facts in this case. Richard being at the convenience store and having a van were the 2 main pieces of evidence that the police were using to frame the guilt of Richard and his brother Gary. So it is important to remember, without the guilt of Richard, then there is not really a way to even tie Gary to the situation. Oddly enough, Gary Thibodeau would be found guilty at his trial. It is a bit confusing how this happened because from all of my research, it appeared that the jury came to the judge and asked how they would proceed in discussing Gary's guilt. It seems that the jury told the judge there was no evidence to discuss when deciding the verdict. You would think that no evidence would equal not guilty, but that is not what happened. The jury found Gary Thibodeau guilty of kidnapping. When Gary heard the verdict, his mouth dropped open in disbelief. This is the point that the mystery of the disappearance of Heidi Allen begins to take some interesting turns. Federal prosecutor Lisa Peoples began looking into the facts surrounding the conviction of Gary Thibodeau. She believed that a major miscarriage of justice had occurred. Unfortunately for Gary, he had already served the major portion of his 25-year sentence, and he was suffering with chronic lung disease that would eventually claim his life. Peoples uncovered a bombshell regarding Heidi Allen. She discovered that Allen had been a drug informant for the Oswego County Sheriff's Department since she was 15 years old. Peoples also found out that the prosecuting attorneys in the case against Gary had withheld this information from his defense team. This was not the only thing that she uncovered. Sometime before Heidi was abducted, and this mystery began, a sheriff's deputy had accidentally dropped the county's informant card of Allen in the parking lot of the convenience store where she worked. This card contained Heidi's name, photo, and detailed information regarding her status as a drug informant. Regardless if you think Gary is guilty or innocent, it is mind-blowing that something that is this important would be kept from a defense team.
Former Oswego County Sheriff's Deputy Christopher Van Patten took a picture of Heidi Allen and put her information, including her chosen codename Julia Roberts, on an index card. Today in court, Van Patten testified about the information Allen provided, saying, quote, "It was rumor mill, what she heard on the street." Van Patten kept Heidi Allen's informant information in his patrol car and at some point dropped it.
This is not the only thing Lisa Peoples discovered about the prosecution and police squashing of evidence in this mystery. At this point, Tanya Priest becomes a major player in the potential solving of this mystery, although it is baffling why she was not an important figure in the story long before now. Tanya began openly telling a story that she claimed she had been telling police for years. She said that in the early 2000s, she was at the home of James and Vicky Steen. Priest and Vicky were watching television one day when something about the Allen mystery came out on television. She said that she and Vicky began discussing whether the Thibodeau brothers really committed the crime. It was at this point that Priest claims that James Steen turned around in his chair and asked the women if they really wanted to know what happened to Heidi Allen. Almost in a bragging, jovial manner, laughing, he began to tell them a story. He said that Allen had threatened some local drug dealers with going to the police if they did not quit harassing her boyfriend. Steen said that on that Easter morning, he, Roger Breckenridge, and Michael Barr took Barr's white van to abduct Allen. He said that when the three men got to the convenience store that he went in through a side door, while Roger Breckenridge went in through the front door. Breckenridge was distracting Allen when Steen stuck up behind her and grabbed her behind the store counter. He said he and Roger then took Steen outside to the van, where he said he had Allen in a bear hug and slammed her against the van. He said that Barr stayed in the driver's seat while he and Breckenridge forced Heidi into the van. This bit of the story is quite interesting since the witness earlier in the story described the man as holding Heidi with a bear hug, and James Steen used the exact same description. He said that they took Heidi to Roger Breckenridge's then-girlfriend's house where the men took turns beating her in the garage. James Steen said that they beat her until she died. Tanya Priest was not the only witness to come forward and tell the police the same story. Several other witnesses claimed that they had heard James Steen bragging about committing the crime. If anyone questions what type of person Steen is and if he would be capable of doing something like this, they would receive that answer just a short time later. James Steen and his wife Vicky would separate not long after these allegations arose. Steen would go on to take the life of Vicky and her new boyfriend. He is currently serving life in prison for his crimes. Tanya Priest claims that the police constantly blew her off and made her feel like what she was trying to tell them was unimportant. She went as far to accuse one investigator of aggressively telling her that he didn't care if they ever found Heidi or not. She said at times after this mystery began that the police would completely ignore her. With all of this new information, Gary Thibodeau and his new defense team, led by Lisa Peebles, felt confident that they would have a successful appeal. Unfortunately for Thibodeau, it did not turn out that way. Gary Thibodeau would end up passing away in prison just 2 years before he had the opportunity to be released on parole.
In a 64-page decision, the judge overseeing the appeal said even though there was a, quote, plethora of information presented, it was not enough for him to overturn Thibodeau's conviction and order a new trial. You didn't feel very confident during the appeal, did you?
Oh, no. This is a kangaroo courtroom all the way, just like the first one.
Got the decision. Judge King denying you a new trial. I don't think were you expecting?
Oh, no, I said from the beginning, this guy was just tapped in there to prolong this and drag it out as long as he can, hoping I die in here.
There are so many sad and unfortunate pieces to the mystery that is the disappearance of Heidi Marie Allen. It is easy to get caught up in all of these instances where things were done incorrectly. But it is very important to bring the focus back to Heidi. To this day, she still has not been found. The disappearance of Heidi Marie Allen will probably never have the complete truth exposed. Unfortunately, without Heidi here to tell us exactly what happened, we can only speculate on who the true perpetrator or perpetrators were.
Mia Moran's going to join us live from the scene in Montgomery with more on this latest search. Mia, here's the question. Why are they out there today?
Well, Gus, detectives say there's no special reason they were back out here in Montgomery searching for signs of Brianna Maitland in the fields and along the riverbank. They say they're actively investigating her disappearance despite uncovering little in the case in the past 5 years.
Brianna Alexandra Maitland was a free-spirited and determined 17-year-old teenager. Her early years were quite normal in context of children who grew up in the remote area of Montgomery, Vermont. She grew up on a quiet rural farm not far from the United States and Canadian border. Growing up in this area is a bit different than most areas in the United States. This portion of Vermont is closer to Montreal and Quebec, Canada, than any major U.S. city. It is an area of the country that prides itself in individualism and self-expression. Brianna had always been encouraged by her father, Bruce, and her mother, Kelly, to find what it is she wanted in life and go after it. Therefore, it did not come as a huge surprise to her parents when she came to them and told them that she wanted to move out of their rural home and closer to where her friends lived in a more populated area. Maitland's parents were confident in their daughter being able to handle this responsibility at the young age of 17. She was trained in the martial arts of jiu-jitsu and had shown great discipline in that training. Bruce and Kelly felt confident that Brianna could defend herself and make the right decisions to be successful as she moved out of their home. In 2003, Brianna Maitland made this life-altering decision to pack her belongings and move to a friend's home. She left the high school that she had been attending and enrolled where most of her friends were going, Innisburg Falls High School. At this point in Brianna's story, things began to go off the rails a bit. Brianna began living a bit of a nomadic life. She would move out of her friend's home and find herself moving to and from several friends' houses over the following months. In February of 2004, Brianna Maitland had become a high school dropout. She had begun working 2 jobs. Her main work was at the Black Lantern Inn and a smaller secondary job waitressing at a small restaurant in St. Albans, Vermont. Brianna at this time decided to move in with a childhood friend named Jillian Stout in Sheldon, Vermont. The Stout home was approximately 20 miles or 31 kilometers from Maitland's parents' home in Montgomery. Brianna still had hopes and dreams of one day leaving this rural portion of Vermont and living a life in the big city. She was intelligent enough to know that dropping out of high school would hamper her dreams in a big way. With that in mind, Brianna enrolled in a GED program and had plans to attend college once she had passed the exam and received her certificate. Like any teenage girl or boy that have a pulse, Brianna became active on the dating scene. Unfortunately, as I am sure anyone knows that grew up in a small town, there was a much smaller field of suitors available. This caused bickering between the teenagers since quite often one girl's ex-boyfriend would become her friend's new boyfriend. This was the case between Brianna and her friend Keely LaCrosse. Keely felt that Brianna had inappropriately began hanging out with her boyfriend. There's a bit of confusion on this point as to whether they were broken up or not. Regardless, Maitland was hanging out with the boy, and Keely LaCrosse was angry about it. Even in interviews years later, Keely's anger would be evident in her answers. This led to a confrontation that would send Brianna to the hospital with a broken nose, 2 black eyes, and a concussion. The teenagers were at a party one night when LaCrosse saw Maitland sitting in her then ex-boyfriend's truck. LaCrosse would go on to attack Brianna. Maitland did nothing and just let Keely LaCrosse punch her in the face. No one can give an explanation as to why Brianna Maitland would let this girl punch her repeatedly without defending herself, especially since Maitland was so well trained in the art of jiu-jitsu. LaCrosse has gone on to claim that people have blown the incidents out of proportion over the years, saying, "I hit her 2 times. She didn't fight back. It looks like I annihilated her, but I didn't. I hit her twice and she didn't fight back. I said, 'You're not worth it,' and walked away. They look at me like I'm a monster, and I jumped her with a crew of women, but that's not what happened." Brianna would go on to press charges against Keely LaCrosse for the attack. Tragically, 3 weeks after the incident, Brianna would vanish, creating the mystery that still exists today. Maitland's family wanted the state to continue with the charges of assault by LaCrosse even after Brianna went missing. But fortunately for LaCrosse, the prosecution would drop all charges against Keely LaCrosse. On the morning of Friday, March 19, 2004, Brianna Maitland would begin taking her steps toward creating a better life for herself. That morning, Brianna took her exam to receive her GED. As a celebration, she and her mother Kelly went out for lunch. Brianna's father Bruce was out of state in New York working. Kelly said that Brianna was upbeat and in good spirits that morning. The two would go on to discuss Brianna's future and what plans she had for college. After the Maitland women finished their meal, they went on to spend some quality mother-daughter time shopping and running errands. Her mother said that everything was going great and that Brianna seemed to be enjoying herself until something odd happened while they were standing in a checkout lane later that day. Kelly would say that Brianna was looking out into the store parking lot when something obviously caught her eye. She told her mother that she would be right back and went outside into the parking lot. At this moment, one of many unanswered questions arise regarding the mystery of what happened to Brianna. Kelly finished making her purchase and made her way outside to find Brianna. Once she had found her, she described Brianna as unnerved, shaken, and agitated. Kelly said that she did not want to pry, so she did not ask her daughter what was bothering her. It definitely brings to mind the question of why Kelly seemed to let Brianna do whatever she wanted and avoided any type of uncomfortable conversation that she might have had if she had asked her some tough questions. Kelly said that Brianna told her that she needed to get home so that she could get ready for her work shift later that evening at the Black Lantern Inn. Kelly would oblige Brianna's request and dropped her off at the Stout residence sometime between 3:30 and 4 o'clock that afternoon. This would be the last time that Kelly would see her daughter. Before leaving that day for work, Brianna would leave Jillian Stout a note saying that she would be home after work. Jillian would see the note, but she left to go out of town while Brianna was at work and would not return home until Monday the 22nd. Brianna arrived at the Black Lantern Inn on time and worked her entire shift. She clocked out at approximately 11:20 p.m. Her co-workers said that Brianna seemed her normal self and it appeared that nothing was wrong. They would ask her to hang out with them and have dinner after the work shift, but Brianna declined, saying that she needed to get home and rest because she had a work shift at her second job in St. Albans the following day. Her co-workers said that it did not appear that anyone was with Brianna when she got into her car and left. The mystery of Brianna's disappearance only becomes more convoluted moving forward because less than 1 mile, or 1.4 kilometers away from the Black Lantern Inn, Brianna's car would be discovered. On the morning of Saturday, March 20th, 2004, state police would be called to an abandoned property in the small town of Richford, Vermont. Locals knew the location by the name of the Old Dutchburn House. The green 1985 Oldsmobile, registered to Brianna's mother, Kelly Maitland, would be found backed into the side of the old barn at the abandoned house. The car had damaged the siding and created a hole in the side of the barn. A piece of plywood that had been covering one of the windows of the old home was lying on the trunk of the Oldsmobile. The Vermont State Trooper that responded to the call did a quick search of the area and decided that the car had been abandoned there by a drunk driver. So he called a tow service that towed the Oldsmobile to a local garage. Inside the car, 2 of Brianna's uncashed paychecks were lying on the front passenger seat. Outside of the car, the trooper found a water bottle, loose change, and an unsmoked cigarette. It is odd to me that the trooper did not run the license plate or check the registration on the car to see who owned it, especially since he thought that the person driving had left the car there after driving drunk. Tragically, as we've seen time and time again by law enforcement in these mysteries, the Vermont State Police made some pretty big mistakes in Brianna Maitland's case. As we stated before, Brianna's roommate Jillian Stout was out of town that weekend, so she did not notice that Brianna had gone missing immediately. It was not until the following Monday, the 22nd, that Jillian returned home to see the note that Brianna had left her was still in the same place she had left it the previous Friday. Stout assumed that Maitland was staying with some other friends that weekend and did not contact Brianna's parents until the next day asking where she was. Of course, Brianna's parents had no idea where she was either. It was not abnormal for Brianna to not speak with her parents for a few days, which combined with the fact that the police did not investigate who the abandoned Oldsmobile belonged to caused Brianna's disappearance to go unreported for several days. And as we all know, the first 48 hours that a person goes missing is extremely important to investigators. On Tuesday, March 23rd, Kelly Maitland filed a missing persons report with the Vermont State Police, and on Thursday, March 25th, Bruce and Kelly Maitland brought police photographs of Brianna. It was at this time that the police showed the Maitlands a picture of the abandoned Oldsmobile, which they identified as Brianna's car immediately. Tragically, law enforcement claimed that Brianna had simply ran away and stated that this was not a case of foul play. The state police did not take photographs of the scene, but fortunately, some motorists found the scene very odd, so they stopped and took pictures. These pictures are the ones that the investigators had to use going forward. Several people had seen the car backed into the side of the old barn late Friday evening or early Saturday morning. One man said that between 11:30 p.m. Friday and 12:30 a.m. Saturday, that when he passed the old Dutchburn house, the Oldsmobile was where the police found it. But he said the headlights were on at this time. Another man drove by the property between 12 a.m. and 12:30 a.m. Saturday morning and said that the car's turn signal was flashing. Neither of these men saw anyone in or around the car. Despite law enforcement being skeptical of foul play, they did send the Oldsmobile to the state crime lab to search for evidence. The police also conducted a search at and around the property, where they found nothing. Bruce Maitland said that when the car was returned to them, that Brianna's contact lens, migraine medication, glasses, and ATM card were still in the car, confirming the family's fears that Brianna had not left the car willingly that night. The family immediately began receiving phone calls from people claiming they knew where Brianna was. The two main claims were that Brianna was tied to a tree in the woods or that she was sitting at the bottom of a lake or river. Nothing ever materialized from these claims. A week after this mystery began, Vermont State Police received a tip that Brianna was being held against her will at a drug house in Berkshire, Vermont, approximately 10 miles from Montgomery. After questioning people about Brianna's possible connection to the drug world, they discovered that Brianna had been experimenting with hard drugs, specifically crack cocaine. This is a claim that the Maitland family refutes to this day. That area of Vermont was known to have a major drug epidemic around this time. The police acted on this tip and raided a home of two known drug dealers, Raymond Ryans and Nathaniel Charles Jackson. Upon clearing the home, the police found drug paraphernalia, a quantity of cocaine and cannabis, but they found no trace of Brianna. Ryans would be arrested on drug charges. The police were able to confirm that Brianna Maitland knew both Ryans and Jackson. The case essentially went cold after this until a few years later when an anonymous woman gave a signed affidavit claiming that Ryans and Jacksons had taken and killed Brianna. She said that Brianna had loaned Ryans several $1,000s and became upset when Ryans did not pay her back. The woman claimed that Brianna confronted Ryans, which led to Ryans and Jackson brutally attacking Maitland. She stated that then the two men took Brianna's body to the basement of another woman's home, who was incarcerated at the time, and dismembered her body. She claimed that the men took her remains to a pig farm and scattered them. It is important to remember that the trial of serial killer Robert Pickton was a constant story in the news of Canada at that time. Pickton was a pig farmer and was known to have disposed of his victims by feeding them to his pigs. So was this woman only saying this because of that trial? We will probably never know. In 2007, the FBI would take a deeper look into the mystery of Brianna Maitland. They would openly state that her disappearance was a result of foul play and that the scene where her car was found was probably staged to try and throw the police off of the killer's trail. Unfortunately, it did throw the police off of the killer's trail. There have been many theories about what happened to Brianna over the years. Some people still believe that it is possible that she did run away, which I do not believe whatsoever. Others say that it was the drug dealers who took her and killed her. Some people have claimed that the same killer who took Mara Murray, a college student who vanished just 90 miles away a month earlier, are responsible for Maitland's disappearance. There is a large group of people that believe Keely LaCrosse had the hatred and the motive to commit the crime, although police have said that she has been cleared. In 2006, security footage from a casino surfaced that shows a woman resembling Maitland, but that lead was never followed up on. Police did come forward in 2016 and state that they recovered DNA of who they believed to be the perpetrator of the crime from the Oldsmobile back in 2004. They did not release any other information regarding the case. To this day, Brianna Alexandra Maitland has never been found, and no one has ever faced charges regarding her disappearance. Hopefully one day, this is a mystery that will have an answer, giving Brianna and her family the closure they deserve.
Police and Spierer's mother are pleading with the public to call in with any information they might have.
I think that we were all very hopeful that there would be that one nugget of information or that one phone call that would come in that would lead us to Lauren. And at this point, that phone call has not been received, but we are still encouraged.
In relationship to that, the person that knows this person that's not coming forward with the information, I beg you to come forward.
Lauren Spierer was born on January 17, 1991. She had a very comfortable upbringing in the affluent town of Scarsdale, located in Westchester County of New York. She had a very close relationship with her parents, Robert and Charlene, and the two of them had put Lauren in a situation where she would be able to succeed in whatever path she chose in life. She graduated from Edgemont High School in 2009. After graduating high school, she spent time at a summer camp in the mountain town of Honesdale, Pennsylvania. It was at this camp that she would meet her boyfriend, Jesse Wolfe, as well as most of the circle of friends that she would be close with while attending university. Lauren became extremely active in the Jewish community after graduating high school. she spent one of her first spring breaks while at university in Israel planting trees on behalf of the Jewish National Fund. She was 20 years old when she seemingly vanished in the early morning hours of June 3, 2011, near the campus of Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Lauren attended Indiana University, where she was a textiles and merchandising major. The semester had just come to an end, and Lauren and her friends decided to have a night out partying to celebrate the end of the school term. She was accompanied by several of her male friends. However, her boyfriend Jesse Wolf stayed at home that evening. According to her friends, mainly Jay Rosenbaum, Corey Rossman, and Michael Beth, Spierer was extremely intoxicated that night. It goes without saying that many students were partying that night and were very intoxicated, as college students do when celebrating the end of a semester. The police were able to piece together a detailed timeline of what happened that evening and early morning leading up to Lauren disappearing. There were multiple security cameras that captured Lauren's movements, as well as the testimony of friends that were with her that evening. At approximately 1:45 a.m., security footage shows Spierer entering the popular hangout Kilroy's Sports Bar. While at this bar, Lauren would take off her shoes while going out on an outdoor patio. The same cameras show her leaving the bar with friend Corey Rossman at approximately 2:30. Spierer was obviously inebriated at this point because she left her shoes and phone at Kilroy's. Sometime between 2:30 and 2:48 a.m., a passerby by the name of Zach Oakes saw Lauren and asked if she needed help because he said that it was obvious that she was extremely intoxicated. She waved off any assistance because she and Rossman had just arrived at her apartment complex called Smallwood Plaza Apartments. While at her apartment complex, video captured Corey Rossman get into a small altercation with another group of college students. One of the males from this group punched Rossman. Between the hours of 2:50 and 3 a.m., Lauren and Corey make it back to Corey Rossman's apartment, where Corey's roommate Michael Beth was still awake. Beth says that both Rossman and Spierer were very intoxicated, so much so that they both were staggering. Beth says that he then helped Rossman into his bed, but on the way into his bedroom, Rossman vomited on the carpet. He said that once Corey was passed out and in his bed, that he asked Lauren if she would stay there because it was so late and not safe for her to be walking around drunk by herself. Spierer refused to stay and said she was going to Corey and Michael's neighbor's apartment, Jay Rosenbaum, who lived next door. Lauren had met Jay at the same summer camp that she had met her boyfriend, Jesse Wolf. Once she arrived at Jay Rosenbaum's apartment, he immediately noticed that she had a black eye, which he thought that Lauren had received from falling earlier in the evening due to her level of intoxication. While at Rosenbaum's apartment, Spierer used his phone to call two of her friends. Neither of them answered. At 4:30 a.m., Jay Rosenbaum claims that Lauren left his apartment. He said that the last time that he saw her, she was walking south down the street with no shoes, wearing black leggings and a white shirt. A few hours after Rosenbaum had last seen Lauren, her boyfriend Jesse Wolf awoke and noticed that she had not come home. He immediately texted her to see if she had crashed at one of her friend's apartments, but instead he received a text from an employee at Kilroy's Sports Bar from Spierer's phone stating that she had left her phone at the bar the night before. It was at this time that Jesse Wolf called the police and reported Lauren Spierer missing. Now, there are a few things that we need to go over before we move forward. The most important being that Lauren's friends say that night she was taking drugs along with drinking large quantities of alcohol. They said that Lauren had been snorting cocaine and crushed up tablets of Klonopin, a drug that is used for anxiety and panic attacks. The police would later find cocaine in Lauren's bedroom, so it is not a stretch to believe that she was using these drugs that night of her disappearance. The mother of Lauren's boyfriend, Jesse Wolf, stated that Lauren had been sent home from the summer camp that we spoke of earlier because she was using drugs at the camp. I could not find any information that confirmed or denied her claim. Spierer was only 4'11" and 90 pounds, or just over 40 kilograms. Coupled the fact that Lauren was so small and that she was drinking heavily and insufflating the upper cocaine and the downer Klonopin, there is no doubt that she would have been extremely intoxicated and most definitely not in the state of mind to be making good decisions whatsoever. All three of Lauren's friends that night chose to bring in lawyers on their behalf very early on in the police investigation. I know that many people think that when someone uses a lawyer in these cases that it makes them seem like they are hiding something. But I personally do not see it like that. I do not know for certain that these men are telling the whole story, but the one thing I do know from researching these cases is that sometimes the police do not do the best of work, and it is probably smart to bring in a lawyer that is looking out for your best interests. The investigation began straight away, and the police had a lead from camera footage that showed a white pickup truck driven by a person of interest. The investigators were able to rule that this person had nothing to do with her disappearance. This led the police with very little to go on regarding the mystery of what happened to Lauren. In August of 2011, police began a 9-day search of the Sycamore Ridge landfill, which receives the garbage from Bloomington, Indiana. It was at this point that it was made public that the Bloomington Police Department was working the case with the help of the Indiana University Police Department and the FBI. As of May 2013, the investigators had received over 3,000 tips regarding the mystery behind Lauren Spierer vanishing. Unfortunately, not much has come from these tips. In April of 2015, another student would go missing after a night out at the same bar Lauren Spierer had been at. Hannah Wilson vanished after a night out at Kilroy Sports Bar. Wilson's remains would be found and police made an arrest after the killer left his cell phone beside her body. The police say that although Lauren Spierer and Hannah Wilson disappearances have some similarities, they are not connected in any way. No arrests have been made regarding Lauren's case, and sadly Lauren Spierer has still not been found to this day.
This original poster you're seeing here was made by the Martin family, who dedicated the rest of their lives to getting answers about his disappearance. He went missing during a family camping trip in the backcountry of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So to understand that search, still the largest in the park's history, we went along with one of the rangers who took part, his name Dwight McCarter. We retraced the steps of that nearly 2-week search 50 years later. Search teams faced at the time days of rain and steep terrain in the area. They marched in lines, I'm told, along the trails in the Smokies looking for Dennis.
On June 20th, 1962, Dennis Lloyd Martin was born. He was like most little boys in America in those days. He loved to be outside playing and enjoyed any time that his father, William Martin, would take he and his brother camping. The Martin men had a ritual of going to the Great Smoky Mountains and camping for Father's Day. On Father's Day, June 14, 1969, Dennis would accompany his older brother, father, and grandfather on their annual camping trip. The Great Smoky Mountains was a short trip from where they lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. That afternoon at approximately 4:30, Dennis was playing with some other children at the campground that the Martin men were staying. Like little boys do, the children came up with a plan to circle around the trees and bushes and then jump out and scare the adults. As the kids broke off to do this, it was only a minute or two before all the children jumped out, except for one, Dennis. William Martin, the father of Dennis, had actually seen Dennis dip behind the bushes and laugh to himself, thinking about his son trying to sneak up on him. Tragically, Dennis never came out from behind those bushes, which led his father to immediately sound the alarm. William instantly jumped up and ran for 2 miles in the direction that Dennis was last seen. He found nothing. William Martin returned shortly, having seen no signs of Dennis. At this point, the grandfather, Clyde Martin, left to go to the ranger station to notify them that Dennis had vanished. Clyde did not make it to the ranger station until 8:30 that evening. By the time the park rangers had been notified, a bad rainstorm had begun to form over the Great Smoky Mountains. In the span of only a few hours, over 3 inches of rain fell in the area, washing away most of the trails and causing the streams and rivers to flood. The rainfall washed away most of the evidence that would have led to where Dennis was. The search that ensued for Dennis Martin is still the largest to this day that has ever taken place in the Great Smoky Mountains. Over 1,400 search and rescue members and volunteers were assembled to search for Dennis. No expense was spared, bringing in helicopters and even Army Special Forces to search for the 6-year-old Dennis. One trail was found that led to the edge of a stream where one sock and one shoe that were the same that Dennis was wearing that afternoon. Unfortunately, not much else was found regarding the mystery of what happened to Dennis Martin. The search was in full motion until September 14, 1969. William Martin offered a $5,000 reward, approximately $35,000 in today's currency, for any information leading to the discovery of Dennis. A major clue came up a few years after Dennis vanished. An illegal ginseng hunter claims that he came across a scattered skeletal remains that were the size of a child. Frustratingly, the man did not report his find until 1985 out of the fear he would get in trouble for illegally collecting ginseng in the area. When the investigators searched the area in 1985, they found no sign of the skeletal remains. In an odd turn of events, the large search for Dennis actually ended up hurting any chance of finding any clues. People recall that because so many people and vehicles were present to aid in the search, it caused serious organizational problems. People say that vehicles were moving loads of people constantly in and out of the area, and that with so many people searching, any clues would have been trampled on and destroyed. The disorganization and frankly mayhem that the search became led the National Park Services and search and rescue organizations to change protocol when searching for missing persons. Sweeping changes in how the groups searching are organized and how motorized vehicles are used are still in place today. Although it is tragic that Dennis Martin was never found, at least much was learned from the search, which has led to successful retrieval of hundreds of missing people since.
Eugene Izzi was born in the south side of Chicago on the 23rd of March 1953. Izzi's father was in and out of prison and was a full-blown alcoholic, so it's of little surprise that Eugene had a troubled childhood. He never caused any major issues, but was very rebellious and always seemed to find himself in trouble. There was always one major thing that Izzi had helped him escape as a child: books. He loved crime and mystery stories, and had the dream of one day becoming an author himself. Izzi would go on to drop out of high school in his teenage years, opting instead to join the United States Army. While in the Army, Izzi would go on to finish his high school equivalency exam, or what is known today as his GED. After his service time was up, he returned back to the south side of Chicago. He began working at a steel mill, but always maintained his dream of writing. During this time, he began drinking too much, and shortly found himself to be an alcoholic, just like his father. With the help of his wife, he overcame his addiction, and finally saw his first book published. He would go on to have a very successful career as a crime author. On the afternoon of the 7th of December 1996, Eugene Izzi would find himself at the centre of a mystery that could have been part of one of his crime novels. Izzi had a writing office off of Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago. A man passing by the office looked up and saw a man hanging by his neck outside the window of the 14th floor. The man hanging was Eugene Izzi. When investigators entered Izzi's office, they were confronted with a scene that could have been straight out of a mystery novel. First, they saw a loaded .38 lying on the floor. The gun had not been fired. Izzi had begun to carry the gun at all times a few months earlier, due to the threats he had been receiving, which we will examine the threats shortly. The officers brought Eugene back in through the window and removed the rope around his neck that was attached to the steel writing desk in his office. They found that Izzi was wearing a bulletproof vest. The officers also found several odd things in his pockets. He had $481 cash, notes documenting death threats he had been receiving, brass knuckles, a can of disarming spray, the spray will be equivalent to pepper spray, and 3 computer disks that contained a manuscript of a novel he was working on. As you can see, Eugene Izzi did not appear to be preparing to take his own life. However, the medical examiner will go on to rule his death a suicide. Izzi's friends and family had a major issue at this conclusion, and they claimed to have a strong theory regarding who would have wanted to have taken his life. Eugene had been investigating a radical racist militia from the state of Indiana. He was collecting information to use on an upcoming story that he was going to write. Although his research was for his novel, Izzi found the militia so troubling, he wrote a letter regarding them to the Chicago Tribune. The paper never published anything regarding Izzi's investigation. Izzi was receiving verified death threats from members of the militia, and according to his loved ones, he was terrified. This was the reason that he began to wear a bulletproof vest and carry a .38 handgun. Izzi had shared several voicemails with his friend Bob Rice, who was a retired police detective. Rice would later say that the threats were 100% real, and on one of the voicemails a female says, "You'll be hanged by the end of the year." Although the police ruled foul play out in this case, it's extremely hard to look at the death of Eugene Izzi and not see mystery with many unanswered questions.
Karen Silkwood was a plutonium lab technician at Oklahoma's energy giant Kerr-McGee Corporation.
Workers were contaminated over and over and over again, and nobody told them about cancer. They said they didn't know about cancer till they read about it in the newspaper during the trial. There's no question about the fact that they're going to die. One man said that he thought he was contaminated on an average of twice a week for 4 years while he worked there. 19-year-old people who came in were contaminated within 1 or 2 days after they started work. They painted over the contamination. They didn't decontaminate desks, walls, floors. They just painted it over with white paint in order to hurry up and get the production back online.
Karen Silkwood was born in Longview, Texas on February 19, 1946. She had always been very dedicated to the work that she was involved in growing up, and this would carry on in her life as she grew into an adult. Karen attended Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas, where she studied medical technology. After university, Karen married, but due to an unfaithful and overspending spouse, she would find herself divorced early in the 1970s. After her divorce was finalized, Karen decided that she needed a change, so she moved from Texas to Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. She briefly worked for a hospital once moving, but she would eventually find her place as a nuclear power plant technician at Kerr-McGee Cimarron Fuel Fabrication in Crescent, Oklahoma. In 1972, Karen Silkwood became the first female to be elected to serve on the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Work Union's bargaining committee. Her role as an elected union official was to oversee health and safety regulations of the power plant where she worked. She took her position with the union very seriously and made a commitment to herself and to her fellow workers that she would bring to light any issues regarding the plant and the health and safety of its workers. When Karen began examining how the nuclear power plant had handled the health and safety of her peers, she was astonished. She found that the nuclear plant was in violation of many codes and rules that had been put in place for the safety of the workers. The Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Work Union would go on to release an official statement saying, "The Kerr-McGee plant had manufactured faulty fuel rods, falsified product inspection records, and risked employee safety." Needless to say, the relationship that Karen had with her employers at the power plant had begun to grow tense. Karen Silkwood was not going to be intimidated by the large corporation that she worked for, and in 1974, she found herself giving testimony before the Atomic Energy Commission. She would tell the commission that she and other workers had faced contamination at the plant due to safety standards being lowered so that the rate of production could be increased. It was not long after she gave her testimony before the AEC that Karen discovered that she would test positive for extremely high levels of plutonium. Plutonium is a very dangerous chemical that is produced to be used as fuel for nuclear reactors to produce energy. The immediate effects of plutonium poisoning can sometimes be negligent, but the long-term ramifications are quite severe. The ingestion of plutonium, either by inhaling or swallowing, is extremely carcinogenic to the human body. On that day, November 5th, 1974, Karen's fears of what the plant was exposing its workers to became very real. The test results showed that Karen had 400 times the legal limit of plutonium in her system. The medical staff at the plant sent Karen home immediately. She was given containers to take samples of her urine and feces so that her radiation levels could be further tracked. Before Karen left to go home, she tested her gear and found that there were high levels of plutonium inside her gloves. However, there were no holes or tears in her gloves, so she had to have been exposed to the dangerous chemical some other way. The test showed that she had both ingested it through her mouth and inhaled the plutonium. According to Karen, there was no possible way for that to have happened. Karen's home would be tested, and several of her items in her home had high levels of the chemical as well. Her home would be decontaminated, and numerous things from her home had to be outright destroyed due to the high levels of exposure. At this point, Karen had had enough. She decided that she was going to take her findings to the media. She scheduled a secret meeting with New York Times journalist David Burnham. The meeting was to take place on the evening of November 13th, 1974. Karen had a union meeting that day at a local cafe in Crescent, where several of her colleagues confirmed that they saw Karen carrying a large file of some sort with her. The file contained all of the evidence that she had gathered against the nuclear power plant and documentation of the plant's violations. She left the union meeting that evening en route to her meeting with the journalist Burnham, 30 miles away at Union headquarters in Oklahoma City. Tragically, Karen Silkwood would not make it to her meeting with Mr. Burnham. She was discovered later that evening in her 1974 Honda Civic. It appeared that she had ran off the road and run into a culvert. The responding state trooper stated that he found a couple of the sedative tablets Quaalude. However, the trooper stated that there was no file inside Karen's car. Karen's family had seen Karen with the file when she left home, and as stated previously, her fellow union members had seen her carrying the folder after the union meeting at the cafe. Her car had damage to the rear end, appearing that someone had rear-ended her, pushing her car off the road that evening. Many people subscribed to the theory that her employer had hired someone to cause Karen to run off the road that November night. Investigators would go on to say that Karen had fallen asleep at the wheel and just driven off the road by accident. Karen Silkwood's family would file a civil case against Kerr McGee Cimarron Fuel Fabrication. A jury in the civil suit would find that Karen had been pushed off the road that evening, initially awarding the family over $10 million. After several appeals, the family would eventually settle out of court for $1.38 million.
Behind the walls of the Vatican embassy, an old mystery brought back to life. Workers found human bone fragments while renovating a building. The Italian media can't stop asking, is it Emanuela Orlandi? The daughter of a Vatican employee disappeared 35 years ago when she was 15. Orlandi's brother believes she's still alive and that the Vatican has answers. The Vatican has always denied involvement.
As for the bones, police forensic experts are trying to determine the age, sex, and date of death. That could take at least a week.
Emanuela Orlandi was born on January 14, 1968. She was the fourth of a total of 5 children. Her parents, Ercole and Maria Orlandi, were one of the few people to ever call the independent country of the Vatican City home. Emanuela's father was employed by the Vatican City. Most accounts state that he was an employee of the Vatican Bank, which will play a major role in this story, but a few reports state that he was actually an employee of the papal household. Either way, her father had deep connections with the Vatican and therefore understood the politics that came with being a citizen of the Vatican City. When speaking of their upbringing within the walls of the Vatican, the Orlandi children remember a time when the Vatican gardens were their playground. Emanuela enjoyed playing the flute, so she continued taking music lessons 3 times a week after her school term ended. She attended Tommaso Ludovico da Vittoria School, which is connected with the Pontifical Institute of Sacred Music. On Wednesday, June 22, 1983, Emanuela was running late for her flute lesson. This is when she asked her brother Pietro if he would take the mile-long bus ride with her from the family apartment in the Vatican City to her music lesson in Rome. Her brother had previous plans scheduled that day and told Emanuela that he could not ride with her on the bus. His refusal to ride with her that afternoon caused a fight between the two, the type of argument that so often breaks out between two siblings. The disagreement has weighed heavily on Pietro ever since that day, with years later him saying, "I've gone over it so many times, telling myself if only I had accompanied her, maybe it wouldn't have happened." The "it" that her brother is referring to in the previous quote is the tragic vanishing of his sister that has had all the hallmarks of a big screen mystery. The Orlandi family did receive one last communication from their beloved daughter and sister. Emanuela placed a phone call to her sister at home after she had taken her bus ride to her flute lesson. In this phone conversation, she told her sister that she was late to her music lesson because someone from the multi-level marketing business Avon had offered her a job. She went on to tell one of her friends at the music school about this supposed job as well. Several of Emanuela's friends have said that they saw her speaking with someone near the bus stop before the music lesson. After the flute lesson, she went to the bus stop with a couple of her friends. One of those friends left shortly thereafter, leaving Emanuela standing at the stop with another friend. At this point, the witnesses say they saw her get into a dark-colored, possibly green, BMW that then drove away. The real mystery of her disappearance has played out over the days, months, and years after. There are many theories and straight-up accusations involving this mystery, the most alarming being the claims that American Archbishop and former President of the Vatican Bank, Paul Marcinkus, ordered that Emanuela be taken. First inclination is to think that this accusation makes little sense, for an archbishop in the Vatican to have a mob mentality. Unfortunately, it was an open secret that the archbishop had direct ties to the mafia in Italy. He is suspected of many crimes, including involvement in the death of Pope John Paul I. He was never convicted of any crimes, but he did step down from his role of Vatican Bank head when his shady financial dealings with the mafia became evident. Since his death in 2006, several people, including journalists and people with direct open ties to the mafia, have come forward claiming that Marcinkus ordered that Orlando be taken that day. The next biggest theory is that a group that was believed to be behind the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II had taken Emanuela. Several phone calls were claimed to have come from the group demanding that Mehmet Ali Agca be released from prison in exchange for Orlandi to be returned safely. Mehmet was the man who shot the Pope in May of 1981. The family received phone calls on different occasions claiming that Orlandi was out in the public living her life under a new identity. The first of these callers was a 16-year-old male who claimed that he and his fiancée had spoken with Emanuela, but that she had called herself Barbara and was selling Avon products. He said that the girl had told them that she had run away from home. A couple of days later, a man calling himself Mario phoned the family. He told the parents that he owned a bar near the Vatican City and that a girl calling herself Barbara had been at his bar recently. He said that she told him that she had run away from home recently, but that she would return home for her sister's wedding. Another theory was brought forth by controversial Catholic priest and exorcist Gabriel Amarth. He claimed that this was part of a sick ring of men who used young females for their disgusting carnal desires. On June 30th of 1983, the family of Emanuela Orlandi and their supporters canvassed the city of Rome with over 3,000 posters that had her photo on them. A few days later, Pope John Paul II would make the first of several open pleas to the public regarding the disappearance of Emanuela. No viable leads materialized from his declarations. Although some of the Orlandi family and many in public believe the Vatican officials and possibly the Pope himself know the exact information that would solve this decades-long mystery. 36 years after the teenager went missing, her brother Pietro said, "I don't know about the theories, but I do say this. The behavior of the Vatican over these 36 years has been one of secrecy and lack of collaboration, and it has made me think there are leaders within the Vatican who know what happened." The implication of Pietro's statements are frightening, and with the corruption that has come to light in the last 15 years regarding the Catholic Church, his words do carry some weight. If the leaders at the Vatican know what happened and have done nothing about it over the years, then in my opinion, their lack of action borders on demonic. However, when analyzing any of these accusations, it is important to remember that men will do bad things, but this does not necessarily mean that the institutions they are associated with are as guilty as well. The Orlandi family thought that they had caught a break in the case when they began receiving information from sources inside the Vatican that they may know where Emanuela is buried. As saddening as the news was for them, they were eager to hopefully find closure in the mystery surrounding their sister's disappearance. The family was told to look in the Teutonic Cemetery inside the Vatican. The tipster said, "Go to where the angel is pointing." This information led them to the graves of two princesses that had been buried there in 1836 and 1840 respectively. However, the mystery of Orlandi was not solved. If anything, it became bigger. When the excavators dug the graves, there was no bodies there, not even the princesses. No one knows where their bodies are. Another strange thing that happened was that an entrance to a mass burial chamber was found, which contained thousands of human bones. The Vatican has refused to do in-depth analysis to find out if Emanuela Orlandi's remains were a part of those bones discovered. The mystery of what happened to Emanuela is both sad and tragic. We may never find out what truly happened to her. The only thing that we can hope for is the truth to be exposed and the Orlandi family to be given some form of closure. Leroy Carter Jr. was born in Louisiana on September 17, 1951. Not much is known about the life of Carter as a child and teenager. The first confirmed fact about Leroy is that he served in the United States military during the Vietnam War. Carter was like thousands of other veterans coming home from Vietnam, trying to find his place in a world that was quickly changing. Much like other veterans as well, Leroy seemed to have been suffering from mental trauma that came with fighting in the brutal conflict. Tragically, mental health was not an issue that the military or the government provided services for when troops came home from Vietnam. Leroy Carter Jr. found himself trying to get on his feet while fighting traumas suffered from his time in the military. His issues were only compounded by the economic slump that America found itself in during the 1970s. Due to the combination of several issues, Carter found himself homeless on the streets of San Francisco. The beautiful Golden Gate Park had become run down during those years. The park was overrun with a heroin epidemic, along with a large homeless population. On any given day, the park could have over 200 homeless residents. Leroy Carter Jr. was one of the homeless individuals that sought refuge in Golden Gate Park early in the year of 1981. On the evening of February 7th of that year, Leroy found himself looking for a secluded and calm area that he could unroll his sleeping bag for the night and catch some sleep. He found a peaceful spot on the eastern edge of the park beside the small body of water called Alvord Lake. It was here that Carter made camp for the night. It would be the last night that Leroy would ever go to sleep. The following morning, on February 8, 1981, a lady found a backpack that appeared to have blood spatter on it. She turned the pack into police, who began to search the park, looking for anything suspicious. What the investigators found can only be described as horrific. The police found the deceased body of Leroy Carter Jr. still inside his sleeping pack. The scene was very gruesome. Mr. Carter had been decapitated and his head was missing. Whoever had taken the life of Leroy had taken 2 kernels of corn and the body of a decapitated chicken and stuffed them in his neck, where his head once was. The investigators knew that this mystery was not your run-of-the-mill murder that they were used to dealing with. They believed that due to the body missing its head and the odd items left at the scene, that they might be dealing with a ritualistic crime. The San Francisco Police Department had an officer by the name of Sandy Gallant that had an intricate knowledge of the occult and the rituals that secluded cults practice. She had been one of the lead investigators of Jim Jones and the People's Temple in California. She had studied that cult and had garnered much knowledge regarding the ritualistic sacrifices and practices. So much so that her fellow officers had given her the nickname Cult Cop. Officer Sandy Gallant was brought in by the investigating officers to see if she could shed some light on the grisly crime scene. Gallant took in all of the evidence, and after speaking with individuals who have intricate knowledge of the occult, developed a theory that Leroy Carter Jr. had been the victim of ritualistic sacrifice. The theory that Sandy Gallant had constructed explained why Carter had been beheaded and why his head was taken from the scene. She stated that Carter had fallen victim to a black magic ritual carried out by followers of the African cult Palo Mayombe. This cult is an offshoot of the practice of Santeria, which combines many Haitian voodoo beliefs and their practices with the Western beliefs of Catholicism. The religion of Palo Mayombe differs from Santeria by adding more blood rites, black magic, and sometimes devil worship. She believed that the brain, and possibly nose and ears, had been used to make a special brew during a dark ritual. The following footage is from the YouTube channel Planet Doc, and it shows the basic steps leading up to a non-violent ritual from this cult.
Jacinto lives in Cuba and belongs to a secret sect called the Abacua. He is preparing for his initiation into Palo de Monte. This is the Cuban black magic of Bantu origin, imported by slaves brought here from Central Africa. In the scenario of the cult, there is a rudimentary altar called the prenda. This sacred place is filled with sacred earth, sticks, human bones, and other magical objects.
As was made obvious in the previous footage, even the most basic ritual that the cult is willing to show outsiders makes use of human bones. It is a fact that this group finds power in human remains when used in their rituals. Gallant coming to the conclusion that a practitioner of this dark religion could desecrate the body of Carter in one of the group's rituals is believable in my opinion. Not only did the cult cop come to the conclusion of ritualistic sacrifice, she told the lead investigators on the case that Mr. Carter's head would be brought back to the crime scene exactly 42 days after the crime. She would go on later to tell the LA Times, at the end of those 21 days, if the priest deemed it appropriate, he would actually sleep in an area with this head and with his cauldron for another 21-day period. Then on the 42nd day, he discards the head in close proximity to where he took it from. To him, that was a sacred way of returning the head. Gallant found herself in an odd place. She had been asked by her superiors in the San Francisco Police Department to give her expert opinion on the case, but those same investigators thought that her theory was ridiculous. Gallant would also go on to tell the LA Times, "We literally were laughed at by our homicide investigators and our chief of detectives. It was like, give me a break, this stuff doesn't happen." The investigators went about investigating the mystery of what happened to Leroy Carter just like any other homicide case that they had had before. Unfortunately, there was not much information to go on, and since they had decided to not pursue the possibility of the crime being a ritualistic sacrifice, they had very few theories as to why Carter had been attacked so viciously. As the investigation into this mystery gained little traction, the days began to pile up, and before the police had made any strides into the case, 6 weeks had passed. Gallant said that even though she and her partner had constructed their theory around ritualistic sacrifice and Mr. Carter's head being returned to the scene of the crime on the 42nd day, they still did not set up a lookout to watch the scene that day. She said that she had begun to think, much like her peers, that her theory was probably ridiculous, since that was all that she heard from her superiors and colleagues. Unfortunately, the lack of action kept the perpetrator of Leroy Carter Jr.'s death from being identified. Just as Gallant had predicted, Mr. Carter's decomposing head was returned on the 42nd day to the place where the crime was committed. Since there was no police presence watching the crime scene, the criminal got away. The San Francisco Police Department became quite silent regarding details of the crime committed against Leroy Carter after his head was found. The investigators would go on to remain silent on any leads that they had or that they were investigating at the time. Tragically, for Leroy Carter Jr. and his family, no one was ever arrested in regard to the mystery surrounding his death. It seems that the case was destined to be a cold case the moment the investigators laughed at the theory that Gallant postulated regarding the crime being a ritualistic sacrifice. Unfortunately, the facts being what they are in this mystery, Mr. Carter would probably never receive the justice that he rightfully deserves. Thank you for joining me today. Please like, subscribe, share, and post a comment. Hit that notification bell so that you don't miss any of the channel's content. Until the next one.